This setup guide is for Preston motors using the FIZLock Universal Kit. If you only have the FIZLock arm without other kit items, you'll need either a 19 to 15mm step-down adapter, a FIZLock to Preston mount, or a hill bracket and hill bracket to FIZLock adapter. The FIZLock will make it easier to quickly swap lenses and will ensure that your gear never slips, no matter how your motor is placed. In this setup, we'll be using the 15mm rod that is provided by Preston, but you can also use the FIZLock to Preston adapter or a Jerry Hill adapter. Since we're using the Preston hardware, we'll first use the 19 to 15mm adapter included in the FIZLock kit before loosely attaching the FIZLock to the motor, with the arm facing away from the gear. The arm orientation is important, and we'll go over mounting the motor inverted later in the video. Slide the FIZLock onto the camera rod to get a rough estimation of where the motor will be, then tighten down the FIZLock where it attaches to the motor using a 3mm hex key. You can take it back off the camera to make it easier to get it really tight. You can also adjust the rosette module to different angles, which is especially helpful if you're particular about where the motor engages with the lens. Before final placement of the motor, adjust the FIZLock's articulating section so that it is neither fully engaged nor fully disengaged. This will allow you to position the motor in either direction once it's set. Now, place the assembly so that the motor is loosely engaged with the lens and clamp down the FIZLock to the camera rod. You should now be able to disengage the motor by turning the knob counterclockwise and engage it by turning clockwise. For low torque motors, basic engagement is fine, but if you're worried about the gear forcing itself off the lens, you can over-engage a bit by giving the knob another twist or two so that it's impossible for the gear to disengage itself. As I mentioned earlier, you can set the FIZLock up the same way using either a Jerry Hill adapter or a FIZLock to Preston adapter. The Preston adapter is compatible with all Preston motors, and it attaches by sliding it into the motor until it hits its stop, and spinning it until you can see a spot for the screw. You can also use DM5 motors by just clamping them straight to the Preston adapter or to a short 15mm rod. There are instances in which it's necessary to mount the motor inverted, either because the body of the motor is in the way or due to optimal gear placement. However, a motor cannot be inverted on the FIZLock arm unless the gear remains past the FIZLock hinge. For a setup to work, the FIZLock knob should turn clockwise to tighten the motor into the lens. Otherwise, the only thing holding the gears together will be the FIZLock spring, which is obviously not good. So, to mount the motor inverted to the FIZLock arm, we'll have to offset the motor away from the hinge. To do this, switch out the current motor mount for the offset arm, which should be configured to have the 15mm rod attached at one end. You'll want to attach the offset arm to the motor to be at an angle something like this. If you have an older offset arm, it may take a little extra work to get everything to line up. Then we'll attach the offset arm using a screw, just like the other Preston hardware. Now attach the other side of the offset arm into the FIZLock so that the gear is well past the hinge, similar to this, and clamp it to the camera rod with room to engage and disengage, just like our previous setup. If you don't have an offset arm or don't have the time to set it up, you can always use the FIZLock just like a normal non-articulating dog bone to mount the motor inverted. Just turn the knob all the way in to tighten the articulating section so that the FIZLock is fully rigid. It's always best to match the rosette module to the rod size you're using, so here we'll switch the 19mm out for the 15mm. But sometimes, no matter how tight everything is on the FIZLock, a 15mm rod may still spin in the base plate. If this is happening, add an anti-rotation bracket to the 15mm rod pair, switch back to the 19mm module on the FIZLock, and clamp the FIZLock down over the anti-rotation bracket. You can also mount the entire FIZLock arm inverted, so that the handle is on the motor side. Since Preston and Heden motors share cross-compatibility, we'll go over a few setup tips for Heden motors. If you attach a Heden motor straight to the FIZLock using the straight 19mm rod, the builds can often end up looking a bit awkward. So it's best to use the offset arm, this time with the 19mm module attached. Attach the motor to the offset arm with the FIZLock attachment just below the gear, then attach the offset to the FIZLock so it'll look something like this. Adjust as necessary. Finding the perfect FIZLock setup may take a little extra time and prep, but it can save you countless minutes on set.